If you want to learn how to make a top-down dungeon crawler, something inspired by classics like Gauntlet and even Diablo, something that has path-finding enemies, an area of effect explosions, something that was the beginning of my own dungeon crawler game, a top-down, couch co-op, action RPG with randomly generated levels and multiple player characters. Then keep watching and I'll show you how. G'day gamers, and welcome back to our top-down dungeon tutorial. Last episode, we gave our enemies the ability to attack the player, so in this episode, I would like to improve the visuals by adding a tile set and transforming it into an actual dungeon, as the series name suggests. You might have noticed I've also moved over to the LTS version of Gamemaker, which means it's the long-term support. With all the new features and changes Gamemaker has had lately, Yoyo have introduced this if you want to use a version that won't get all of the features, but also won't get any new bugs introduced along the way. It's a set version for 2 years, so to make it easier for anyone viewing the video in the future, they can be sure as long as they have the 2022.0 LTS, they will be using the same version as I'm using here. So the first thing I want to do is just drag in the tile set that's in the resources folder, and you'll find that in the resource link all the way back in one of the earlier episodes when we added the sprites. So I'm going to just drag that in and add it to our tile set. Now we need to create a tile set from this sprite. So let's just right click and create a tile set. And I'm just going to call it T for tile set underscore walls 47 for the number of tiles in this set, and also 32 by 32 so I know the size of the tile set. Now when you create a tile set, you need to allocate a sprite. So let's just drag that over and drop that in. And we need to set the size of the tile set. Well, as we said, it's 32 by 32. And now if we go to our rooms and we go to over here, so you'll see there's an inspector, which is a little bit different to what we've had in the previous versions. Now if we click on background, and I'm going to create a tile layer to place our tiles. I'm just going to call it tiles underscore wall. So now that we have a tile layer, we need to allocate a tile set to that. And then we can start drawing with the tiles. So what you want to do is basically just take the tile that matches what you're trying to do, and you can add it in like so. So now we need a corner piece. So we just take that and add that in. And then we need a piece here for the wall edge. So I can take that, put that there. And you'll start to notice it's very slow to add the walls in like this. So the good news is there is a better method. So I can press S, select lots of things, and just cut those out. You can use this method to copy and paste different things. But luckily, there's another way to do this. So let's go in here. Let's go to auto tiling. And let's make an auto tile set from what is here already. So there are 47 tiles or 16. Our one is a 47, so we click on the plus. Now for the first tile, Gamemaker always leaves the top left empty, so you don't have a tile there. But for this, the first one is actually down here. And then we've got to tell it which tile is for which little piece of gray. So the light gray is a wall, the darker gray is empty. Great thing is that these are already set out correctly, and we've just got to go and click on each one and fill in the tile set that way. Now, if you make a mistake, you can just click back. Say if I click it wrong, you just can go and select this one and just choose the right one. It'll turn red like that, indicating that you have used the same tile twice. So it shouldn't be red when you finish. Now I'm going to name this walls. And I'm going to create another one, and this time it's for the shadows. And it's the same thing. So the first one is the empty one, and then we go and click on each one. So starting here. Now the shadows will just be placed on the outside of the wall just to give it some depth. And I'll show you what they look like once we go and fill them in. And that should be all. So as long as they're not red, it's done correctly, we can right click here and rename, and we'll just call this our floor. So back in the room now. What we can do is on our tile wall, over here we have under libraries, we have our auto tiles. So So we can click on walls. And now what happens if we can drag it over here and it automatically fills in the correct ones. So much quicker to do something like that once you've set it out all correctly. So you'll also notice our walls don't align exactly with the grids for our solid. And that's because our solid is a 16 by 16, while our tile set is a 32 by 32 for our walls. So let's go and fix that up. So the first thing to do is go to our OGame, and in our room start event, you should have a section where we're setting our tile size. I'm going to change this to 32 for our TS, which is our macro. And then what I want to do is open up our sprite for our solid. And I'm just going to change it to 32 by 32. And we can close that down. So now when we go back, our solids will be all over the place, but that's okay. We can hold down P and click on them, delete what we don't need, and basically just add them again. So you've got this grid of 16 by 16. You can go up here and change this to 32 by 32 for our collisions. And that'll keep them in sync with what we're doing for our motion planning grid for the enemies. Just keep it all the same. I just wanted to take a break and appreciate who makes these videos possible. I spend many days creating this content and editing into a tight package for you to digest. And it would not be possible without my Patreon supporters. So this month, I want to thank these legendary Patreon members, Andy K, Big Honk, Eric Justin, Jake Dowds, HK Pig, and O Cossity. If you want to show your appreciation, you can do so over on the Patreon site. Now let's continue. So there we go, drag all that there, and same here. And they fit nicely. Now they don't have to be the same, the motion planning grid for the enemies and the tile set grid, because it can cause some issues with enemy movements if you have them differently. Now to do some more testing here, I want to make the room a little bit bigger. So to get the room properties now that Gamemaker has changed to this inspector mode, I found that you just have to go to workspace and then go back, and then it brings it up. In your version, that might be different, but it's the only way I've found for this LTS version of actually getting to the inspector for the room. So let's change the size. I'm going to make it 1080 by 720. And if we just hold down Control and wheel mouse, we can zoom out. So let's go back to our wall layer and make sure we're on our walls here. And let's just draw in some more of the level. Now you can do whatever you want. I'm just going to draw a very basic one just to show some examples of the kind of things that we're going to do with our solids and our enemies. So let's just add some here, make a little sort of corridor maybe here. Now, if you draw and you make a mistake, you can right click and it'll remove one piece. So I'm just sort of put something down here, a little bit here, maybe something here. And you know, something like that. Maybe just a little corridor here where they can get through. Section up here. You got to think that the enemies are going to be in these areas, so you don't want to make it too squashy because you want some movement for the player. You want to give the player the ability to at least, you know, dodge or move out the way when they try to bite them. And something like that. Now, because the player is going to be moving around, and this is the only view that we'll actually see, we can actually have a camera follow the player. So once again, to go down here, I'm going to click off and then click back. And then down here under viewport and camera, under viewport 0, there is a camera following or object following option. I'm going to select the player. And then for the border, I'm just going to set it to 160 and 100, just so it's not exactly in the middle of the width and height of the actual camera view. Now, we don't have a floor at the moment, so I'm just going to hide the collisions there for a second, and we'll add a floor. So let's make some new tile layers, and this one's going to be called Tiles Floor Marks, and then we can make sure that we select the tile set. Okay, so let's duplicate this. And this one is our tile floor shadow. Let's put that below. And let's duplicate this again. And this one is our tile floor base. So for the base, it's just, I want to use the actual tiles for the ground. So if I select one and do the drawing, you can change the brush size and make it quite large and just fill all those in all at once. And if you zoom in, you can see it's, take off the grid, you see it's like a gridded tile that we're going to use. Now for the shadow, if we go to the floor, then we can start to draw that in around where the floor is, and you can see it there. So we can draw that in like so. If you make a mistake, you can just right click and remove that section. So that's one way to do it. If you change your brush size though, you can paint it all at once and go back, and now you can just right click on the sections where you don't want it. I think it's probably easier to do it that way because there's less walls than there is empty floor. So it's actually quicker to just do it like that, I believe. By just going and right clicking around the border of everything, you can see it's just filling in a little shadow around on the floor for the outside walls. So I'll just quickly go and fill all that in, and just there. And this one as well. Okay, and just up there. Now, looks like I've missed a section of floor. So if you click back on the base, you can go to your tiles and just go on the floor and just click that back again. And I think that's pretty much everywhere. Now, if you want to do your auto tile, the shortcut key is A, press A, and then you can auto tile for the default one. But if you need to go to the other one, you've got to actually manually click it. And that should be enough. Now for marks, if you go and look at your asset, look at the tile assets, you'll see that there are some marks on the ground here. So basically some scuff marks, and you can just randomly click it and place it around on each one, and it just breaks up the level and makes it not look as uniform and clean. And you click on the next one and do the same thing. So just tap it around everywhere, and it will just make it look a little bit more lived in. Not so sterile, really. Just wanted to pause quickly to acknowledge the epic supporters for this month. They are Skydevil Palm, Robert LeBlanc, Robert Churches, Sudo, Sir Peter, Dafong Singh, Chris LeBlanc, Anthony Sanderson, Sadface, Dennis Evans, Slime Dungeon Official, Peter Grusing, Nick, Alex Wachowski, Apex Aliens, Joseph Carmelo, Cloudy, Monty Hobbs, Pavid Baga, Joshua Barfield, and Marlo Dobb. Thank you all very much for your support. It's greatly appreciated. Now back to the tiles. Now I'm also going to go to the enemies. I'm just going to remove them at the moment. I don't really want to use enemies just for this section. Now the other thing we need to do is add the collisions. And this can take a long time because you've got to go and add a solid for every single section of a wall. And I don't really want to do that. So instead of that, if we go to here, click on this, click on that, and delete them all. Let's go and add them via code based on if there is a wall on a tile position. So the idea is we can loop through basically every grid position, every row, every column, and we can check that and see if there is a wall tile there. Well, then we can place a solid object there. So let's go back over to OGame, and I'm just going to drag this over so that we can share this with a visual user as well. And inside our room start, let's just make this large. And let's increase the font a bit there as well. So just here, what we want to do is paste in this section of code. And we're going to loop through every tile and add a single solid if it's a wall. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the tile map ID from that tiles wall layer. And we're going to loop through all of the Y positions and all of the X positions. And we're going to look at that tile at each position. I'm going to get the ID of the tile. And if the tile ID is between 1 and 47, well, if we go back to our room and we look at a tile layout, you'll see that each one of these is numbered. And down here is the number. 0 for the first one, 1, 2, and so on. So if it's a value between 1 and 47, then that means it's a wall tile. And if it's a wall tile, well, that means that we can add an instance of an O solid on top of that wall tile. So when it's true, at the position of XX times our tile size, because remember this is adding up from 0, 1, 2, 3, but then we need to multiply it by our tile size to get the actual position on the grid. What we want to do is create that O solid right there. And at the end, after we've looped through every grid position, we are then going and adding those instances to our MP grid so the enemies know to avoid those walls. So let's test it out. I'll just click run. So now what we can see is over every tile wall, we have an instance, and we can't click or hit through that. We can't walk through that. It's just like we laid them ourselves. Now there is a problem with this though. If we just go into our O game and we add a draw GUI event, and then in here, I'm just going to paste in something that lets us draw the number of solids at a particular position. So let's have a look at how many solids we're actually creating by doing this method. So down here, we've got 291 single instances of O solid. And remember, this is an instance, this is another. These are even though they look the same, they're single ones. Every tile position is another one. So it's not really a great method to do it, but we can fix it up. And how we can improve it is by merging the ones that are next to each other. So once again, go to our O game. And after we've added them all, let's loop through again. And if any solids are next to each other horizontally, let's merge them into a single one. So I'm just going to do this down here after we've added them to the MP grid. But really, this could be done at any time. So I'll just paste that in. And what we're doing is the same thing as before. We're looping through every grid position. We're getting the ID. And we're doing a check and saying, is there a solid at this position? We can just do collision point because it's a single point. So it's checking the top left corner of each grid location. And we're storing the ID of the solid that we found in inst. Now, we just go down here and we can check and say, if inst is equal to no one, then we can continue. So if nothing was found, then go to the next grid position. But if something was found, well, then let's replace the solids to the right of it. So if we go back to our room and we find a solid here, well then, okay, let's look to the right and let's replace these two and make them one whole solid. So we're looking at the instance that we found and we're doing a do until because we're going to set the change value to false, which means that if change doesn't happen, then we'll go out of this loop. And that means that we didn't find any more solids in the horizontal line to the right. So what we're doing is checking for the instance next to us to the right. And if that's another solid, then we check it here and we just add that solid's value to our ImageX scale. And that basically moves this solid and makes it bigger. So now we've made the solid the same size as itself and the one next to it. I'm going to change the color of it so that we know it got changed. And we can delete the one that was next to it because we absorbed its size. And then we can set our change to true because we did find a solid. So then we won't be able to loop and we'll go back and do it again. And that'll keep happening until it doesn't find any more and then it'll come out of there. Now to show this color, I'm just going to click on O solid and let's just add a create event. And I'm just going to say that our COL is equal to C white. And let's add a draw event. And then we can draw that color. Now you don't have to do this. This is just so that I can show you what it's actually doing. Yeah, so I'm just going to paste this in. You don't need to do this. This is just so that I can show you that the colors are actually changing. So let's run this. And now what we can see is that we have solids here, but they've changed. They're actually one whole solid. This is still a single. These are single ones. But these ones have all changed and they've merged into one. And now we're down to 94 instances of O solid. So there's much less. But can we improve it more? Well, yeah, because vertically, we also need to merge them, not just horizontally. So these can all merge. These two could merge. So we need to do a check and say that if they're basically the same B box left, B box right, well then let's merge them together. So let's just do that. And just down here under our do check, but within our width still, because we're still talking about that particular solid, let's add this code. And here we're going to merge with any solids that are the same shape. So we'll look at the instance above and we're testing that like this, just looking at one solid above. And if it's not equal to no one and the above one's left B box is equal to our B box and the above one's right B box is equal to our B box right, well then we can actually move ourselves. If we're the bottom one, we can move up and position ourselves where the top one is and add one to our image Y scale, which means we're now as big as the bottom and the top, and then we can destroy the one above. So essentially what's happening is in these two cases we're running from this instance and we're looking above us and we're saying, is our B box left the same as our B box right? If it is, well then we'll go to this position and then we'll make ourselves that whole height. So we'll change our image Y scale so we're as big. So basically we're absorbing everything above us. Now, let's run that and test that out. So now we're down to 46 instances. Much better. These have been merged. All the ones that match above all merge, and it's pretty decent. So that's a really nice way because it's all automatically done for you now. You don't have to do anything, and it only runs once at the room start to set up all your solids for you. So back over here, we don't need any of this code anymore. So if you did create this, you don't need this. It was just to show you what's actually happening. Now, the other thing is, well, we have no enemies. So sure, we can go manually add some enemies if we want, or we have an enemy layer. Let's just use our code here and let's add them in automatically. So when we do our check, if we're in a solid wall, that's all of this code. So we don't want to add an enemy, but if we're not in a solid, well, let's add an enemy at that tile position. So just here, I'm going to paste in an else, and therefore, if we are not in a wall, the tile's empty, so maybe we should add an enemy. Well, let's do a check. We can do an if random 1 is less than or equal to 0.1. So there's a 10% chance when it runs this check. If the check succeeds, well, then we can just add an enemy at that position. Now I'm adding the tile size divided by 2 to the X and the Y. If I don't do that, then it's going to create it at this position here. But now I'm creating it halfway and halfway, so right in the middle. And that's why we have that extra code there. So now we're adding random enemies. If we press play, let's see what that looks like. Great. So the enemies are all appearing and spawning. Let's just go and ensure that we turn off what the solids look like. So over in our room 1, we can just hide that collisions layer. And now we can just run that again. Now we've got random enemies appearing. They're all over the place. And we have our solids, our collisions. The enemies are using the MP grid to navigate and find the player. You can see here. This kind of spawning method is really powerful and can be used to modify many parts of your level automatically. You can randomly add chests or breakables, or even add different types of enemies. Someone had asked in a comment whether I can leave homework for each episode to help them practice their new coding skills. Well, for this episode, I'm going to do just that. You saw me manually placing scuff marks on the floor. Well, I want you to delete those and add some code like we did with the enemies to make the scuff marks be random on the floor. My hint is you will need to use functions like tilemapSet and choose, but it should be very similar to what we've already done. Over on our Discord server, we have a new forum section where I'll make a new post so you can share your solution. I'll also add my solution, but ensure you try it first before taking a look, as it will really help you develop your skills by trying to solve it yourself. Then, if you're really advanced, you can add a way to automatically add the shadow tile layer. Now, this is much harder to do as you need to analyze all 8 tiles around each tile, and then you pick the correct shadow tile to use based on those results. And if you solve that, well, you're probably too advanced to even be here, so most likely you're watching the wrong tutorial. The last thank you is to my rare Patreon members who generously have given to help keep the tutorials flowing. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.